Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
What's up, everybody? Brian Parker back again as your host for today's interesting episode. We are about to dive back into a world that we've explored many times before, which is anabolic steroids, but we will be taking a different approach this time around. While we educate on steroids every day here at the Taylor Hooten Foundation, it is not every day that we actually come in contact with those using these drugs. So we wanted to talk with someone who does. That's why in this episode, we speak to Imran Khan. He's the owner of Transform Now, which is a health and wellness company based in the UK, and they work to improve the health and fitness of all their clients. Over the years, they have ended up working with many clients who use performance-enhancing drugs. Instead of having a condescending view on this use or making any kind of moral judgment, they provide advice and warnings to these people while they monitor their health. An important note here, Transform Now does not condone anabolic steroid use. However, they do believe there is a lack of medical assistance available to users that are looking for somewhere to go. Because of this, they believe in being that resource that users can come to for support. So in this episode, we're going to talk to Imran about his background, who he sees coming into his office, how he provides treatment and what he's trying to prevent, if he's worried that his treatment is encouraging continued use, and what he thinks need to be done to prevent the growing usage problem as a whole. We're also going to discuss his current research in this area that we look forward to sharing with you in the future. So for now, let's bring Imran into the show and learn about what he's seeing overseas. Imran, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk with you. I know we were talking a little bit before I even hit record on what our conversation is going to be about today. And it's one that I think is going to be really fascinating, not just for our listeners, but for me myself, because as we were just saying, I'm someone, our foundation talks about things like anabolic steroids every day, but we also like to talk to people like you that deal with anabolic steroid users every single day. So you see things that I talk about. And so I'm curious to kind of hear about what you're seeing and ask you some questions about some of the things that you're working with. So I think it's going to be a really fascinating conversation. And I appreciate you spending some time with us today.
No problem, sir. Glad to.
Well, let's hop into this. Before we kind of get into what you are seeing now, I always like to start our conversations with a little bit of background on our guests and kind of who they are and learn a little bit about why you do what you do. So let's start with that. Give us a little bit of background on yourself, where you're from, what got you interested in the world of health as a whole, and maybe even anabolic steroids. What got you interested in that when you first got started?
Well, I'm from England, over the pond, I think you guys call it. City, Birmingham, an old industrial city, very much like Detroit. My sort of background is in health and rehabilitation. I've been working in health for over 25 years. I also worked for various aid agencies abroad in conflict zones. And I spent a lot of time working with spinal injuries, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis. So my original sort of first contact came into testosterone about 15 years ago, when it was used clinically, and it still is used clinically for people who have muscular diseases or they've had severe accidents and they have illnesses which they get muscle deterioration or the muscle starts wasting away. Now, I've also trained since I was 16 years old, from rugby to kickboxing to powerlifting, and I've competed rather unsuccessfully, I'd add, at a fairly sort of decent level. So steroids and anabolic steroid performance-enhancing drugs, they've been around me for over 30 years. So it's just really, I've been seeing them for a long time. Now, originally when I worked in sports physiology, I worked with lots of different teams on performance. So that this topic would come up over and over again. So from the mid-90s, this constant topic of, do you think I should take steroids, or I'm taking steroids? And you have to remember one fact, that in the 90s, early 2000s, most of the performance-enhancing drugs were actually clinical and pharmaceutical grade. And then over the years, many of the companies have stopped manufacturing these. So it was an issue which was always around, very similar to America, from baseball to basketball to American football. It's always been around. So we started doing some research, started looking into this. using the current data and research, we started looking into it. Currently, I'm doing a PhD on the use of anabolic steroids in performance and non-performance athletes. So I am very fortunate that we're working with different people around the world, but I have the biggest database in the world of blood test results, ECG scans, echo scans, and cardiac CT scans of anabolic steroid users. So we actually have data, probably for the first time in the last 30 years at least, of real data from a longitudinal perspective on how the health is being affected. So this is actually very important. We're publishing at the end of this year. We're also publishing next year, and we hope to complete probably about 2 to 3 years' time. But we're looking at over 27,000 users, and over a period of 5 to 6 years. So this is very comprehensive, and it probably is the most accurate data we have in the world. And then this data is being analyzed, algorithms are being done, and we will see, dependent on the dose and the type of drug, on how it can affect your health, either positively or negatively. We're then also examining using psychological and psychology theories and algorithms on behavior patterns and the type of user, the background, the history, the demographics, and the actual effect why one person will use anabolic steroids and another person will not use anabolic steroids. So that's quite extensive. It's a lot of different things we're involved in and which we're looking at. And we've had a lot of interest globally from health bodies, from different countries, from other researchers who are more than happy to help us in our research. And we're very grateful for that help as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot you just said that I want to dive into. I want to kind of separate like your research that you're doing now and kind of when you got into this. So you've been in this for a while, a couple of different reasons why. Obviously, your own background in physical fitness and athletics was part of it, but then kind of what you started to see, in your own medical career that kind of got you interested in this as well. And then you've kind of taken that and developed this research that you're talking about and deal with a lot of the users that I mentioned before. But before I dive into that research that you're talking about and what you're starting to see, I want to also kind of clear up a little bit for our listeners about where you're getting that research and who you're doing it through, right? So you actually work with a group called Transform Now, right?
I actually own Transform Now.
Okay, yeah. So let's I want to set that framework up, but that's the group that you own and that's who you work with, and that's what your research is going through. So give us some background on that group and kind of what you do as a whole.
We are a bunch of health professionals ranging from endocrinologists to doctors to cardiologists to sports physiologists, and we work with athletes and non-athletes in health and wellness. So in very simple terms, we try to make people better than they are, as in performance. So this could range from somebody who's 60 years old, who's had a spinal surgery and they need some rehabilitation, or it could be somebody who's on the verge of signing a pro contract to play football or to play rugby or to go into boxing or mixed martial arts, etc. So we work with these. We also work with federations which drug test, and we work with federations who don't drug test. So essentially, our aim and objective is to keep people healthy and make them perform to the best of their abilities.
That makes sense. And then some of the people that are coming into your office, which we're going to dive into this a little bit, I know they're dealing with a variety of health and wellness issues that you work with them on, but obviously some of the people that are walking in are using anabolics, performance enhancing drugs of some type, whether it be for athletic reasons, appearance reasons. There's obviously, we know that people get in this for a bunch of different reasons. So I know that is a focus of a lot of the people that you work with. So just so I can also continue to frame our discussion before we talk about those people that are walking into your office. I know that you work with them a lot, the people that are using this, but as a whole, just so our listeners know, your group is not endorsing PED or anabolic steroid use. I'm correct by saying that, right?
We do not endorse the use of anabolic steroids unless they are for a medical reason,
right?
A certified medical reason. We don't encourage people to use anabolic steroids. In fact, the exact opposite. And we are undoubtedly the pioneers in the UK, and in many cases, without being arrogant or cocky, some of the protocols and procedures we put in place are used globally. And we were one of the first people who talked about this issue, because it's the biggest elephant in the room. Everybody knows it's there, but nobody really wants to discuss it.
Right. Yeah. And so, I wanted to put that out there because I know that's your stance. But I also know that, when people do come into your office and are using this stuff, there's no judgment there, which, in many ways, I applaud that as well. Right. Because this usage is going to happen. And part of your mission is to help those people that are involved with this. Right. And I am a little bit curious about who those types of people are that are walking into your office. Like, if you kind of summarize your patients as a whole, what's the demographic and background of a lot of your clients? Are they a lot of bodybuilders? Are they athletes? Or you have a lot of non-athletes? Who are the people that are walking through your door the most?
It's a whole bunch of people. So just to give you an example of slight on a lateral perspective, let's say we have a strongman competition, and a natural athlete will, for example, maybe deadlift 300 kg or 340 kg. The paying crowd want to see a 500 kg deadlift. This is what they want to see. The sponsors want to see a huge deadlift or a huge lift or a huge pull. Nobody wants to see those figures from the 80s anymore, or the early 90s, or the 60s or 70s. So the champions from the 70s and 80s, today they'd be lucky to win a local or a national competition. Even a state regional competition, they would be very lucky to win this. So we have a whole host of people ranging from your normal track and field to boxers, to people who are competing in non-tested federations, to older people, to people who have unfortunately abused steroids in their younger years and now they have health problems. And the system here in the UK, the National Health Service, doesn't really cater for them. So there's a vacuum created where people need treatment. We are very fortunate. We work with some of the best cardiologists in the UK, some of the best endocrinologists. So we're in a position to refer these people without any judgment. We are not going to say, hey, you were stupid, you were a fool, you deserve this. We're going to send them to the best people to get the best treatment, to improve their quality of life and to make them healthy again. And this is the sort of objective and mission we have. We're not about condemning people. We understand that people want to win. Individuals want to win. Individuals are competitive. If they're in a field where everybody is using anabolic steroids, then of course they will also use steroids. And then at least we can keep them as safe as possible for the longest duration as possible. And when they reach a point where we say, look, guys, this is now affecting your health, hopefully they're sensible enough to stop.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is an important part of this conversation, because it's one of the things I struggle with as well, is I do think there is a lack of medical resources surrounding this issue. I mean, I don't think that's any different over here in the States as well. I mean, I get that question a lot. It's, let's say I do have someone that is using this stuff and they need help, whether it's be to quit or to manage it or whatever it may be. Where do I go? There is no central resource at this point, right? You have to hope that you have some medical professional resources around you or in your lives that have some kind of training on this issue. And as you kind of said before, there's many that don't. And so it does kind of create an issue there on like, well, where do people turn? Which I know is one of the reasons why you started putting this together. And just from you and I talking before we even got started, it sounds like you do treat a lot of people. I mean, you told me 25, 30 people a day are coming in there. So how does that correlate to what you're seeing in the UK as a whole? Like, do you have any idea on numbers or studies or overall percentage of people in the UK that are using this stuff? I mean, what are the laws even for anabolic steroids in the UK?
It's very interesting. It's estimated 1 million users exist in the UK currently. I would estimate that at a lot more than that, possibly 2 million. The laws are very similar to the States. It's a class 3 drug. It's not illegal to use. It's illegal to sell. If you can have a certain quantity for personal use, and that quantity isn't stated. Of course, there's a huge black market. There's an organized crime element to it. There's a huge, it's a multi, if not a billion, it's certainly very close to a multi-billion type of industry. And then you have the regulatory authorities. They've made various rules. The implication is extremely difficult. So the perspective from the police and the legal bodies is really, we've made laws to stop people using them. Every now and then there's a high-profile arrest, but really the people using them are not the same as, for example, heroin addicts or crack addicts. They're not robbing or stealing to fund their habit. So therefore, it's not really a priority. The needle, for example, from the health bodies, very, very few bodybuilders, if it's a tiny, tiny percentage, will exchange needles. So therefore, it's not really a priority from anybody's perspective, other than from fake medicines, from counterfeit drugs, counterfeit illicit drugs, and certain use of sleeping tablets and certain use of medical drugs such as Clomid, tamoxifen, diazepam, certain blood pressure tablets, metformin, growth hormone. So this is when something is taken seriously. If huge quantities are seized, that's when the person generally gets prosecuted. So the law also varies from police force to police force. So like you have different states. So for example, in Scotland, the laws may be different to Wales, and Wales they may be different to England. The implementation of the laws vary from different police bodies and legal perspectives. So there's no really uniform policy. And that's another problem. To give you an example of how difficult this is to work, it took me 3 years to have my research approved by an ethics council. So I went from university to university, begging. I have this very interesting data. I have this very interesting research. I'm looking for people to help me, supervise me in a research project, and the doors were being closed. Well, we don't really know this. We're not really too sure. We don't have a supervisor who have this skill. We don't know what we're looking for. What is the purpose of this? So we had lots and lots and lots of ethical issues before the research even got commissioned. And it took 3 to 4 years to get this done. So if you imagine that you're knocking doors for 3 to 4 years to get it done, it's extremely frustrating, extremely annoying. And we have to give an example, we have several hospitals and medical practitioners who refer clients onto us because they have no training, they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. Now, we are not GPs, we're sort of, as in PhDs, we are not GPs, we're physiologists or nutritionists. So the doctor, the MD doesn't have any experience of this, so they will then refer them on to us. So you have a legal limbo in between. What do we do? How do we handle this person? Where do we send them to? Do we refer them to a cardiologist? Do we refer them to an endocrinologist? Do we refer them to a urologist? So this is where we can come in and refer them to the right people and get the right healthcare they need. Now, then you also have, for example, the psychological aspect. Some people may need counseling. Some people have the hope of winning and having that Mr. Olympia trophy. It doesn't always matter, doesn't always happen. In fact, there's only one Mr. Olympia a year. So the psychological basis of this, in some cases, extreme narcissistic behavior, violent behavior, mood swings, as well as health problems, relationship problems. These are it's all encompassing. There are people discussing this now, but the industry is a very closed industry. And the more people talk about this, the easier it becomes to cancel people out from this industry. And there's lots of other nuances which exist. And it's not an easy task. But, we are moving in the right direction, albeit very slowly.
Yeah, a lot of the issues you're talking about are actually no different over here. I mean, you're right. A lot of the laws sound to be pretty similar. I mean, our usage rates, it's always hard to know. I mean, studies will say 3 to 4 million, but as you say, there's always going to be probably more usage than's going to show up on paper. And then it's also, again, enforcement can vary. It doesn't seem to be, top of mind as many other substances that are out there. And so, it does continue to persist for a lot of those reasons. And then it sounds like, part of what you're doing is, when it is persisting, you're providing that go-between to make sure the people that are getting involved are kind of heading in the right direction to get themselves some help. And that's where I'm kind of curious about what your process looks like, right? So give me an example. Let's say a steroid user does come into your office looking for treatment. What are the first steps? Are you conducting a variety of tests on them? What are you looking for? Are you looking at their blood work? What's the first?
We would look at the blood. You see, blood work. There's a myth that blood work will solve every problem, and this is not true at all. So the blood work is just a part of the process. So we would do extensive blood work. We would also then conduct an ECG, an echocardiogram, which is all in-house, and all very confidential. If there are markers which are highlighted, which are of concern, we would then address this issue. We would talk to the client and look also basis upon their plans. For example, if somebody has prepared 5 years for a competition, they are not going to, generally speaking, stop. So the best thing to do, instead of trying to force them to stop, is to work with them, is let's cut your doses down, let's get you through that journey, and then it's over, and let's call it a day. And we have been extremely successful in this, extremely successful. And I think either that's our attitude or our philosophy or our team. I couldn't put it to what, but we've been very, very successful in this, in helping people to get their goals, their gains, as well as getting them to stop using when those goals have been achieved. Also, we have to sometimes be harsh in the sense that not everybody will be a champion. Some people are deluded. Unfortunately, it's a horrible word. They are delusional. And we have to sometimes, for a better word, to be horrible and say, look, this is not going to happen for you. You are not going to win. Instead, enjoy the sport, enjoy the training, enjoy the health and fitness side of it. And through results and data we have and various charts and algorithms, we can prove to them that the path they're on will lead to cardiac disease, it will lead to kidney failure, it will lead to dialysis, it will lead to problems, it will lead to infertility. And again, we've been extremely successful in that approach as well.
Yeah, and those things that you just mentioned, that's what I wanted to bring up next, was when you say you're looking at ECGs and the blood work. And by the way, I'm going to put a link to your website in the show notes because it has a lot of great information on what it is that the process that you take everybody through. But those markers that you're looking for, what are you seeing coming up the most? Is it cardiovascular stuff? Is that the most common, kind of marker that you're seeing that you got to hold on?
There's two main things we have to look at: the cardiovascular markers and the kidney markers. Fertility also, but if we just discuss the kidney markers, certain drugs will increase blood pressure. So that will obviously put stress on the kidney. So we have to look at that marker. We have to look at what we would call idiopathic polycythemia, as in how thick the blood is or how syrupy the blood is. Now, there's a new trend of constant blood donations or venesections, which will then lower the iron levels. So there's a balance of how to do this. So once the kidney function starts deteriorating, in many cases it may be irreversible. So this is the first marker which is important. Now, whether we like this or not, if a person took 2 or 3 cycles, generally speaking, it won't really damage them. They'll recover from that, especially if they're young. They'll recover from that. But what we know from data, most people will take steroids for 15 to 20 years. So after 15 to 20 years of use, the odds increase exponentially of infertility, of kidney damage, and of course of an enlarged heart and thickening of the heart. At some stages, this can't be reversed, but we then are in a position to say, look, you've damaged yourself to a certain level. It's time to stop, call it a day, and try to improve your health. And this is where our team, which is an excellent team of cardiologists who understand the use of anabolic steroids, and endocrinologists who do understand this, they are also brought in, and urologists, and we're able to design a package and work with that particular client to improve their health. Now, it sounds very simple, but it's actually not that simple if somebody's still competing or wishes to compete, or if somebody likes the look they have, or that physique gives them the confidence to live their daily life. So lots of other facets are involved in this.
Yeah, no, I know it's not simple. I mean, one of the reasons why, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was kind of the addiction of using this stuff. I mean, what I'm starting to see, some of the research that's out there is starting to show a little bit of physical addiction, but what both you and I both know, and you just kind of alluded to it by saying people use this for 15 to 20 years, is people get addicted to the results of it almost more than anything else, right? So, if you're providing treatment for ongoing use, are you concerned that it does keep them in it too long? Like it does keep them in it for 15 to 20 years. And then, as you said, they're dealing with side effects that may be irreversible, right? Or are you hoping that you can slowly minimize that use to a point where some of that can be reversed, right? It's a tough question, right? Because, people are going to be in this for a while. If you kind of I don't want to mean to say that you're keeping them in it, because I don't think that's always the goal. You're trying to minimize it, hopefully get them to a point where they stop. But if we are just managing side effects, do we worry sometimes that, okay, well, I am keeping them in this long enough to the point where, you know, they're getting addicted to this, and I don't know that they're going to be able to get out?
I think the reality, Brian, is initially, I think this is a myth that you can manage side effects.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing is, so our stance is, again, very clear. You are damaging yourself. It's a cost-benefit ratio. If you're going to win the Mr. Olympia, for example, most people will take that risk. And this is a risk we understand. People will do that. The same as any extreme sport. Snowboarders, skiers, motorbike racers, they all know the risk. If they crash, they could die. So people know that risk, but at least they're in a position to make an educated and a knowledgeable decision on their health and on their future. Most young men who come to us, and females as well, if they're young, they will generally listen to our advice and they will take on board what we're saying, and they will not have the problems which the older users have got. However, the culture and the gym culture and the subculture, for some people, it's very powerful. That old adage of the young boy who gets sand kicked in his face and now he's training, he's taking steroids, the whole Child Atlas advert, etc. He's now become a big, strong young man and nobody's kicking sand in his face. He's getting the girls. He looks good. It's perfect. That doesn't last. That look, that strength, etc. It doesn't last. So in many cases, people will realize when they meet a partner and now they want to have children, a lot of people will stop using from there. For some people, they will continue using regardless of what they do today or what they do. They just won't stop. And for those people, there's not much we can actually do. We can advise them, we can help them. But with our stance, they probably will stop coming to see us and really go somewhere else or go nowhere at all. So we can only help those who we can help. Yeah. Yes, I take the argument that are we creating longevity or are we increasing the use of people by advising them? And you could probably say, yes, we are indirectly, to be brutally honest. But we don't see any other option either. So it's better to keep people safe than not to keep them safe.
Oh yeah. I'm sure you get that question all the time, and that's what I want to be sensitive with how I ask it too, because I know the end goal is not to continue.
This is a very. I used to at one time work in a drug rehab unit, and people would often ask, "What is the best way for us to take cocaine? We're not going to stop, but what would be the safest way to do it?" And the medical profession would answer that question. They would tell them to do what they have to do. I'm not going to repeat. Obviously,
Let's not.
But they would be told what to do to keep them as safe as possible. Now we need a mindset change here. Is that we need to address the issue that some people will do this regardless, and they will grow out of this. The whole society is extremely sexualized now. Social media is extremely powerful. Hundreds, if not tens of thousands of online coaches who profess to be natural. Young men are looking at their bodies. They want a similar body. And in the last 5 years, online coaching has grown exponentially. There's coaches who have become multimillionaires. They have teams of people working for them. They give out the same diet plan, the same cycle plan, etc. And, so we're not in a position, we have to be realistic. We're not going to stop it. But what we can do is get people to stay away from the more dangerous drugs. We can get people to stay away from the drugs which would affect them psychologically, like trenbolone, where it can have huge detrimental psychological effects. We can get people to stay away from that, and we can help them to minimize their use and keep safe. And it's a very double-edged sword, isn't it? It's a very tricky sort of situation. And this is, again, there is a moral dilemma here. And it's better, it's better for people to be safe than people to be just ignored and dropped out.
Yeah, I mean, you're even using the word safe, which is making me think about so many stuff. Because I don't know, I'm gonna guess you've heard this question even more than I have, right? But you're right that so many young people are getting driven into this because of body image, because of social media, because of all these external factors, and it is creating, a lot of doubt in people's minds and body dysmorphia. Like you said, it's creating use at the end of the day. And this is a question that I've got, and I have to imagine you get it too. Like, I literally have young people come up to me and they ask me, is there a safe way that I can use steroids? I mean, in those exact words, I've heard that before many times. Do you get that question as well in those exact terms? I mean, because I always answer it like, well, there is no safe way to take steroids. Like, that word doesn't really compute with me. Like, it's not safe, but, perhaps, I don't know, is a better way is a word that you use? What phrase do you use? I mean, how would you even answer this question?
If I had $1 for every time somebody asked me, I'd be living in Beverly Hills. I'm asked this question every day of the week for probably 25 years now. Now, there is no safe way.
Yeah.
However, one can minimize the risks to keep people the safest they can doing something which could potentially be harmful. And the way around that is extremely small doses, eat better, and train harder. Now, one of the things which is a huge difference from the 80s, 90s to now, I genuinely believe people trained a lot harder when the accessibility and the knowledge of steroids, or the misknowledge of steroids, or the variety of steroids were not common. So, for example, when I joined the gym in 1986, we had no idea where to get steroids from. We had no idea on who to speak to. We saw some big guys and we would train for 2 or 3 hours a day and we just followed their lead. Now, today, if you're 60 and you join a gym, you can buy the steroids immediately. You can buy them from Facebook, you can buy them from websites, you can buy them from Instagram. It's no big deal. So considering we have so much knowledge now and awareness, we have a lot more deaths and serious illnesses now than we did in the 90s. So something hasn't worked. It's quite clearly something hasn't worked. Now, to give you an example, you have to remember this as well, and I'm sure you have this in the States. We hear about the famous name who dies, Cedric McMillan, for example, Ian Dallas, with lots of other people. We hear about these famous people who have died. What we don't hear about is the normal guy who's not famous, who hasn't won a competition, who's had a heart attack, or who's had a stroke, or who's having dialysis, or who needs a kidney. We don't hear about these people ever. We just hear about the famous name. Now, we, in our role, we are the exact opposite. We see and hear every day of the week of normal people. They're not famous, they're not well known, but they've developed serious health problems. And I can tell you for a fact, and often people say these figures are exaggerated, I have all the data. In 2021, I know of 119 people in the UK who I know of, this is just who I know of, who died of an illness directly related to anabolic steroids, a direct correlation. Now, often people will say, let's blame the COVID jab. That's a separate argument altogether. It was due to bad healthcare. The doctors didn't take it seriously. They had a congenital illness. They genetically were ill. No, this is all not true. This is direct correlation to anabolic steroids. Now, I know of, currently there's a study being done, 1,556 men under the age of 35 with infertility through using anabolic steroids. I also know of a study of 80 girls who have serious health issues from using anabolic steroids. I'm also aware of a study which, in fact, I've worked on, which was an echocardiograms of 350 people of anabolic steroids, and 69% of them had enlarged hearts and thickening of the heart, in simple words. So this data is real. This is not made up. This is real data. Now, so when people are often, we have coaches or people who want to argue or discuss things with you, I'm not really bothered, and I'm not really even prepared to get into that debate because I have the data and they don't. And this is clear-cut medical data from scans, from diagnostics, from hospitals, from doctors. Now, the unfortunate thing is when we have somebody famous or known who passes away, we have this whole question being asked for 2 weeks. Let's do this, let's have a scan, let's look at the sport, let's analyze why. And then it's forgotten. And this must be happening in the States all the time. And then it's just completely forgotten. Now, we have different podcasts, we have different athletes talking about, you recently had Big Carly in America He had a heart attack, which he attributes to anabolic steroids, and he discusses about how they damaged his health psychologically and physically. But it also remembered he's made his name through his physique and the look he had. So one of the things we hear quite often from young men is, well, look, I won't be like Carly. I'll take less. I'll know when to stop. I'll monitor my health. And as I've said before, there's a huge trend in America and Europe to get blood work done. And this is actually a trend. This is not enough. Blood work is not enough. What we have to have is before every competition or before every competition prep, there should be an echo scan. But there's a cost to this now. And the cost is the athlete or the bodybuilder or the gym goer willing to bear that. And generally speaking, no. And this is another problem.
Yeah, it's no different here. It's really I mean, honestly, you could almost apply that logic to a lot of issues, right? When something happens, we talk about it for a couple of weeks and then we do seem to move on. I would even argue that a lot of deaths, potential side effects, issues in play, like you said, people for whatever reason want to make an excuse that it wasn't the substance, it wasn't the anabolics that was doing it. Even though that we know that it was. I don't know where that reaction comes from and why that's how we are and why this can't catch on as the big issue that it is in society, yours and mine. You know, it's out there and it needs to catch on because of everything that your research is showing us, right? All of those numbers that you just told me are very real, as you have seen firsthand, right? And that's why I laugh when I don't laugh, but when people come up to me and they say, is there a safe way to do this? No, because of everything that you and I are talking about. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to choose not to, but you know, I think we do have to get that information out there. And I know that's one of the things that you're doing, because in my opinion, that's how we go about preventing this use. I mean, do you agree? Like, if we have all these people using it, how do we prevent it? Do we just need to educate more? Do we present more research like you are? What's the next steps that we can take? People outside of just you and I are talking about this more, and we're preventing these numbers from going up.
I think one of the things we have to look at it, which I call like a helicopter approach. We have to look at it from the top and not look at it from the bottom. We will have a certain part of the population, regardless of what we say, regardless of what the data is, they will do what they want to do. So it sounds harsh, but we can't help them. And therefore, if they want help, there's different bodies, there's different places they can go to. But if they don't want any help, we leave them alone. Now, colleges, universities, etc., they have different campaigns against steroids. Generally speaking, I think they may seem successful on paper, but considering use is increasing every year, in reality, they're not so successful. So what we can do, and I think especially in the National Health Service, which is a public healthcare system, the doctors or medical profession, we have bigger worries of people, for example, with cancer, with injuries, with broken backs, with serious illnesses. So we don't have the budget to put towards the use of anabolic steroids. And ultimately, people are making their own decision and they should deal with their health themselves. That is a valid argument. This is fine. I accept that. What we can do is, number one, is not as such condemn and say to the user, well, you're a freak, you're this, you brought this onto yourself, you've done this, you've done that. And in fact say, right, what's happened has happened. How can we address the issue now? And how can we try to get you as healthy as possible? So I think that's the first stance. Secondly, what we need is more active research, and we need funding for this, is that we need research to put this real data out to the public. Now, I've spoken to you, and now you're aware of this data, and I'm more than happy to pass this data on, this research on to you. And what we need is other authors, researchers, to combine our data together to give real figures that in 2010, this many people died, and in 2020, this many people have died, and 2025, this many people will have died, etc. So the comparison can be made. And a lot of naivety and the bro science, I mean, the whole health and fitness industry, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, which is not in reality based upon science. It's not really based upon, there's a lot of bro science, there's a lot of rumors and, things are made up to sell certain supplements. Other things are done. There's a vested interest in the industry for people to use steroids, and this is extremely hard to break. Every expo around the world, it's really a celebration of anabolic steroids. It has nothing to do with health or fitness. And we, unfortunately, are part of that as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you that we need more research. And I can say that coming from our perspective, because the presentations that we do, that's what we're doing. We're pulling research from various sources, and we want more, right? We do want more. I do think there needs to be more research on not only how big this issue is, but as you said, what's happening to the people that are getting involved. Because yes, I do think I don't necessarily believe in scare tactics. I don't really like that phrase, but I do think if people can see that and realize, okay, these really are dangerous substances. Like there's got to be more information out there to make them think twice about this. And ultimately, what I think that research leads down to is education, which is what we're all about. And and I know that you do some of that too. I mean, there's groups that you discuss and advise on these issues with as well. Like, tell me a little bit about that. Who do you talk with? What are you telling them? What educational stuff do you have in the mix?
We've given dozens and dozens of seminars and workshops to doctors, to the medical profession, to cardiologists, to various professional health bodies. We've discussed this issue with the police. We've spoken to the military on this issue, given workshops to the military. We've spoken extensively to professionals within public health, university level, school level, college level. So we're really open to anybody who wishes to learn and who wishes to even pick up the early signs. So to give you one example, there was a young man, 14 years old, whose father was giving him Debo because he wanted this kid to play professional rugby. And rugby is like American football without the padding. And now, so father is giving his son performance-enhancing drugs to make him bigger and stronger. But as far as he was concerned, we take them for a few months. Once he makes a team, then we'll stop. But this child, by the time he was 16, had developed gynecomastia. He had developed, his kidneys were strained, and he'd put a lot of excessive weight on, and he wasn't selected. Now, this is the tragedy of it. So the father actually had good intentions, but didn't have the knowledge to do this and had nowhere to go. So we have like a UK sport, we have a UK drug body, we have a different form of academics, and the information can sometimes be conflicting. And as the author Collins has said, the reality of steroids is they do work. They will make you bigger, stronger, faster. They will do it. Now, so it has to be addressed at a local level, at a college level, a university level. And in many ways, the punishments possibly in drug-tested sports, where they are being drug-tested, it needs to be better and more informed. So if you want to nip it in the bud, you want to sort of spoil it at the start before somebody does it, that is what you have to do. Now, the problem would be in the non-drug tested federations, the federations lack money. They're businesses. They're there to make business. They don't want their number one athlete to be tested positive, the person who draws the crowd in. So the best thing is don't test them then. Now, one of the things they could do to make it safe is they could quite simply say every competitor before every competition has to have an echocardiogram. And this would, or an MRI of the abdomen, so you could see if the heart is being damaged. And if it reaches a certain level, then we're sorry, you can't compete. So you could technically say, take what you want, but if your heart does start thickening, if this event does happen, then you cannot compete. This would be a fantastic, simple way of preventing deaths. So no athlete would push himself past a certain limit. So that just wouldn't happen. But no, I don't think any federation in the world would do this.
No. Even the drug testing, here is while it does provide a powerful deterrent at times. As you said, there's situations where it's just not feasible, whether it's cost or whatever. There's also situations where people just don't want to have it in place, which is why, again, our belief is always let's trail back to education. It's the most cost-efficient mode of prevention, right? Because we're not going to be able to test everyone, and not everybody even wants that in place, right?
Yeah.
So,
and let's be honest, many people know how to pass a drug test anyway.
Yeah. And if they don't understand what they're being tested for and why they're being tested, it doesn't become a permanent solution. And it also doesn't prevent, as you know, just the people that are using them recreational for appearance reasons. They have no reason to be drug tested. So again, if they're not getting education on this, there's not any deterrent for them in place, right? So I think that's why it all boils down to education, and I'm happy that y'all are doing that, and obviously that's what we'll continue to do. And honestly, that's why you and I are having this conversation, because believe it or not, just by what you and I just did, hopefully some people hear this, and it does provide some sense of education on what's going on here, what can we do about it, and create awareness. And I think that's what we need more of, right? Create more awareness of the issues, so that people can be more informed of the issues that are at play.
Yeah, and I think that if all the cards are on the table, I think most young men will be sensible and take a sensible approach if they know the risks, if they know what may happen, if they know what could happen. If they know by taking this dose for this length of time, this will happen. No ifs or buts, this will happen. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it many times. People will come to you, individuals, and say, when I was younger, I really blasted and I shouldn't have, and I damaged myself. I wish I'd known at the time. We hear this all the time. And at least if they do come through our door, or they come through our avenue, at least that situation won't happen 10 years from now.
Sure. And I've always said that, if through education or whatever it is, or through, assistance that you're providing, look, if we can save one life, we're headed in the right direction. And that's the end goal, right? I think you and I both know that we'll never prevent all usage for all of time. It's not going to happen. But if we can, continue to be a resource in any way, provide education in ways, I think that helps, right? And
I think the education authorities, they have to, my research, for example, it's self-funded. And I'm fortunate in a position that I am to fund my research. Now, they should be funding available. It's minuscule to, for example, money which is spent on lots of other projects. It's actually tiny, but funding should be available for research. So if, for example, an athlete does want an echo, there should be funding available for him to get that echo, because this is all part of data and research. And in the UK, it's quite strange because it's public funded. Health prevention is not really catered for.
Right.
So they would rather spend $10,000 a year from now than spend $500 now.
Yeah, we're a bit of a reactionary society. I think that's how a lot of this operates, and again, a lot of this is just going to boil down to we need more people that are aware that how big this problem is, right? And how serious this is. And I think we are headed in the right direction. And hopefully this conversation is a part of that direction, in managing people that are involved with this is part of that direction. Education is part of that direction. I think we will get there. And you're right. The more we talk about this, I do think people will make the healthy choices and want to achieve those goals the right way. And that's all we can do. So I appreciate you having this conversation and being part of that education. I also, do think that being a medical resource for people involved with this is actually a positive thing. I think we need that more, because right now there's not a lot of places for people to turn, right? So having more of that, having more education is a positive thing. And I appreciate this conversation being a part of that.
I'll be more than happy when we'll be publishing at the end of the year, and I'm more than happy. I've said this to any researcher, anybody around the world. I am more than happy to share my data, my information, the protocols. If it can help even one person, then at least we've done something right.
Exactly. Please do. When you do, we'll share it with all our listeners. We'll get it out there. That's the goal. So we'll look forward to that. I'll look forward to continued conversations with you. But for now, thanks so much for the time. We appreciate you hanging out with us and discussing these issues, and keep us heading in the right direction.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances, and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.